Behind every door are unseen truths. Growing up, my small family lived behind the door of a rental house near the top of a hill on the border of Santee and El Cajon. Between Thanksgiving and the New Year, we could look out of our dining room window and see the holiday star glowing over the city, just off the landing path of Gillespie Field. From our porch, we could listen to the putter of small plane engines as they glided in for a landing, and breathe deep the scent of earthy geraniums when summer faded into East County winter. In my youth, our house on the hill felt like a sanctuary, a place all our own, where love ruled, if imperfectly. In those days, my mom was outnumbered 3-1. She tried to keep a tidy and cozy home, but to little avail, other than socks left everywhere, or my Arabic dad's proclivity of leaving piles of sunflower seed shells on a napkin overnight. All us boys were pretty shameless about how stinky we could be. He was the kind of dad who would chuckle after passing gas loud enough to make us turn to look, and none of us knew how to close a bathroom door unless we had visitors, and even then I'd sometimes forget. Rather than just close up, it was more likely we'd yell at each other to light a match. I loved that house. I felt safe behind its doors. One summer evening in my early teens, my parents left my brother and I home alone to go to a wedding. Our primary instructions at that age were to keep the doors locked and tell callers of any sort that our parents were home, but indisposed. Asleep, I could say. Bad headache, sick, whatever. I never believed I'd need the ruse. Besides, I was raised to despise a liar. But that night, a man knocked vigorously. I spied him through the front window. He was slim and barely into his 20s. I answered through the locked door. He demanded my father by name. "He's asleep," I said, sticking to the script. "Well, you need to wake him up," the man yelled. I hadn't counted on that response for some reason. I continued to lie badly, wrestling with my conscience, but the man persisted, and he got more aggressive. My younger brother began to panic. He walked into the kitchen and curled up next to the fridge and the clothes dryer. The kitchen was huge and was best when it smelled of my dad's cooking, though more often it smelled of coffee from the morning that I would microwave for my folks when they asked, or wet bleach in the washing machine. That night, I only smelled fear, though there might have been a pizza getting cold on the counter. I grabbed a baseball bat and knelt down by my brother and said, "It's going to be fine," in a wishful confidence I did not feel. Some of the details are foggy. I remember the interloper said he was from some local casino, that there was something owed. Jean, our neighbor from the house a little higher up the hill, called our phone in the middle of my shouted conversation with the man through the door. Jean was a trucker, the stepdad of my friends, and salt of the earth. He called all us boys lad and smelled of tobacco and denim. "Hey, lad, would you like me to come down?" "Yes, please." I had just called my uncle as well, but he was across town. I think if Jean hadn't been there, the collector would have been killed by Uncle Nick. They sent the collector packing. I had not called 911. What would I say? I wasn't entirely sure who the bad guys were. Certainly not my parents. But they were only mortal and never really explained what transpired, why the man had been there. "It was a misunderstanding," was all I got. Nothing like that ever happened again. But from that moment on, I realized that for all the shamelessness and love in our home, there were still things I would never fully know. When I was slim and barely into my 20s, I knocked on doors, though not to terrorize kids hiding them in their own homes. As a cable guy, people invited me inside, but there was still an element of anxiety. Each open door revealed private lives. It was often a bit of a thrill to see what lay on the other side of the threshold. But it was not only what one sees. The scents of a home tell a truer tale. The incense of circumstance and social stance. I became a sort of stank sommelier, coming to appreciate the smells as a kind of unspoken poetry. The lingering spices of regional cuisines, meats cooked in rich herbs, or curries simmered to succulence. The chemical coverings of cleaning supplies, or the reek of rotten refuse. Sometimes it was the resident pets that owners had become close to. Their musks muted to all but me, dank dogs or incontinent cats. Once some guy had a ferret he'd named Coors because it naturally smelled like it had been dipped in beer. Eventually, even the most fetid funk can be forgotten if lived in long enough. Sometimes the scents imbued a mundane horror. At an apartment in South San Diego, when the door opened, my eyes stung as the musty air hit it. The place was closed down and hot, not just warm, but stifling. I had to hold my breath as they showed me where the cable came in. The lights were off, and I had to move a lamp to get behind the television. When I set it down, the floor scattered away from the impact. Hundreds of tiny roaches scurried across the old carpet. Even just outside, the odor of rot pushed itself upon me like an assault, a soup of vomit, sweat, and defecation. The residents seemed unfazed, or perhaps so phased they didn't even know they were living in putrescence. I was disgusted, and more than physically, I had to step away. There was a baby in the apartment somewhere. I had seen a crib and empty diaper boxes. I saw no baby. At another apartment in Midtown, I knocked, and a small child, maybe 5 or 6, opened the door without hesitation. From the back room, I heard a woman yell, "Who is it?" "Cox," I shouted, as in Cox Cable. "You already took him last week," the voice came back. "COX," I yelled, "not COPS. "Oh, come on in." She never got out of bed while I was there. The kid didn't speak. He smelled like wet candy. After visits like that in my head, I could hear a proud voice that sounded just like me say, "I will never be as bad as those people." While a better voice answered calmly, "They're but by the grace of God." Over 10 years, I came to know more than words or pictures can truly express about the people whose homes I visited. I involuntarily inhaled the air usually reserved for only the most intimate aspirations, sometimes even final breaths. There was a man in El Cajon. He was in a single-room apartment, una cajito dentro de El Cajon, a small box in a large box. I had instructions to just enter on my paperwork. I knocked gently to announce myself, then turned the handle. The door was unlocked, and I made my way inside. "Hello?" I called. The front room was dark and sparse, just a folding chair. "Back here," a weak voice spoke. I went to the bedroom. He lay on a single bed, heavy and pale. A bottle of oxygen sat next to him on the floor that was hooked to a tube running to his nose. He reclined on mussed pillows, so he sat up somewhat. There was a TV tray next to him with pills and liquids and a remote control for a tiny old tube television that sat at the bottom of the bed on an empty box. The man sat in his own excrement, unable to move out of it with what little strength he had. He did not tell me this. I knew it. It filled my nostrils and dared me to flee. There were bed bottles full of yellow urine on the floor next to him, and one lay on its side. Blackened banana peels were strewn about. On the small tray table, the floor. One was on the bed next to him, on top of the blanket. The cable had been frayed, pinched by his bed somehow, probably when someone had moved it carelessly. I had to edge my way next to him and kneel down to get at the wire. My knee hit the carpet, and I immediately felt wet seep into my uniform pants. Plague doctors covered themselves from head to toe and wore horrific masks that made them look like menacing crowmen, the beaks filled with herbs in an effort to ward off the disease and the smells. The outfit I wore was issued by my for-profit company, who paid me $13 an hour and counted my work up at the end of the day by a point system to make sure I'd done enough. There were no points awarded for mercy or kindness. I was supposed to be a professional. My professional pants were wet with a dying man's urine. I found the fray and did my work while the man lay above me, wheezing, holding on to whatever life was left him, abandoned to wallow in his own filth. And all I did, was kneel in his piss and not complain and do my job to the best of my ability, because no matter who he'd been or how he'd lived until that moment, I could do that for him. Did he have family, friends? Did he deserve this? No idea. What I knew was that I wasn't in a bedroom. I was in a lobby with a mortal man waiting for death to take him, and I wanted out. There was no poetry in what was coming for the man in El Cajon, but I didn't make him sign the receipt, at least. I offered no other comforts, no fond memories of a brief personal connection, no clever quip or wisdom to recall years later at a reading among strangers. I didn't think I had anything more to offer. I certainly knew better than to say, "It's going to be fine." Wishful confidence had since given way to jaded realism. Once in a while, I can still see and smell the man who I left alone in the room, the daylight through his window fading, the glow from the old TV replacing it. I have had nightmares since, of dying alone, in dying light. At least in my dreams, the room is clean and smells of air conditioning. Like the room where my mortal, perfectly imperfect dad died. But he was not alone. Over 10 years ago, well after my cable guy days, he suffered a sudden, massive stroke in that house on the hill behind those safe doors. At the hospital, his body kept going just long enough so that everyone who needed to could say goodbye, including Mom and my brother, who flew in just in time. Dad lay in that clean bed in the cool room, and it was us waiting for death to take him away. By then, my tears were spent, and I was at peace beyond understanding with what was coming. Jaded realism had since been tempered by a comforting faith, hope, and love. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It keeps no record of wrongs. That's the Bible. And there are other truths about love. See, when Dad finally passed, he released one final stinky gift as his body and all its flaws and functions were left behind. I could almost hear him chuckling on his way to heaven. Sometimes, like the song says, love stinks. When it does, don't close the door. Light a match.
Put your hands together for Nas Helewa.